Klobuchar used to be the top prosecutor in Minnesota. And when she was the top prosecutor, she tried a case involving a 16-year-old murder suspect. Now that case has come back up for discussion because of how it was prosecuted and how this 16-year-old was sentenced to life behind bars. And there was little to no evidence to convict him. Now I'm gonna give you all the details of what happened in that case. Unfortunately, the victim in that case was an 11-year-old girl. But before we do, I want you to watch this video where Chris Wallace asks her about it and just pay attention to how uncomfortable she is in trying to dodge the question.
They found police offered cash to potential witnesses and relied on testimony from jailhouse informants who got reduced sentences. Senator, did you know, when you were the prosecutor, did you know about any of that? And should this man's case be reopened?
Well, justice must be done, Chris. And just to put it in some context, this was an 11-year-old girl named Tyesha Edwards. She was doing her homework at her kitchen table, and a bullet went through the wall, and she died. And it was a tragic case. It was a big deal within the African-American community. And our focus was on bringing the people to justice and doing justice for her family.
Senator, I mean, we know. Let me just say, we know it was a bad case. The question is whether this young man did it, and this AP investigation indicates that other people who were there said he didn't do it, and that some of the witnesses that were relied on were very questionable. You were the head prosecutor. Did you know? And if you didn't, shouldn't you have known?
There actually were two trials in this case, Chris. One was after I had left the office.
But he was convicted in the case when you were the prosecutor.
If I could just answer.
Okay, so she's struggling. There's more from the interview, but I want to give you some important facts from this case so you kind of understand why it's being talked about now. The Associated Press went back and they started speaking to witnesses and really digging into how this case was prosecuted, and they found a number of significant issues. So to go back a little bit, an 11-year-old girl was killed by a stray bullet while doing her homework at her dining room table in 2002. Klobuchar's office put Tyesha Edwards' killer, a black teen, behind bars for life. Klobuchar's office convicted Myon Burrell, an African-American teenager, over the shooting death of 11-year-old Tyesha Edwards back in 2002. So that was when the prosecution happened. Now, an Associated Press investigation into the 17-year-old case uncovered new evidence and inconsistencies, raising questions about whether he was railroaded by police. The case relied heavily on a teen rival of Burrell's who gave conflicting accounts when identifying the shooter, who was largely obscured behind a wall 120 feet away. With no other eyewitnesses, police turned to multiple jailhouse snitches. That was written by the Associated Press. Some have since recanted, saying they were coached or coerced. Others were given reduced time, raising questions about their credibility. And the lead homicide detective offered major dollars for names, even if it was hearsay. Despite the lack of physical evidence, they all but wrapped up their case against Burrell in 4 days. Again, this was a minor 16-year-old who was convicted and sentenced to life in prison based on pretty much no evidence and just hearsay by individuals that police spoke to.
So look, people make mistakes, and God knows I've made plenty of mistakes. I think the right way to go about that is to try to correct it and make amends. But when you see Klobuchar and Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg having made significant mistakes, all coincidentally involving the African-American community. Now, Kamala Harris is African-American herself, but she was also a prosecutor like Klobuchar and was very tough. And in the old days, they would say tough on crime. Now, looking back at it, it looks like tough on minorities. And the reason people are concerned is not because, oh, you were too tough on the people who did it. No, you were tough on people who might not have done it at all based on their background. And so I know she's in the middle of a presidential campaign. I know it's days away from voting. And so she's in a tough political spot. But the way you could have avoided that is by coming out earlier and going, you know what? I don't think we did justice here.
Right.
But they just can't ever say it.
Right.
They can't ever say it. They always double down or try to evade.
Let me give you a few more facts about the case before we go to the last video on this. So there was no gun, fingerprints, or DNA Alibis were never seriously pursued. Key evidence has gone missing or was never obtained, including a convenience store surveillance tape that Burrell and others say would have cleared him. His co-defendants, meanwhile, have admitted their part in Tyesha's death. Burrell, they say, was not even there. For years, one of them, Ike Tyson, has insisted that he was actually the triggerman. Police and prosecutors refused to believe him, pointing to the contradictory accounts in the early days of the investigation. Now he swears he was just trying to get the police off his back. Here is a recent quote from him. He says, I already shot an innocent girl, said Tyson, who is serving a 45-year sentence. Now an innocent guy, at the time he was a kid, is locked up for something he didn't do. So it's like I'm carrying two burdens, okay?
So you know what's amazing to me is, so whenever it's a progressive, they'll go say, oh, what did you say 28 years ago, 38 years ago, et cetera. They're about to do that to Bernie Sanders after he wins Iowa, if he wins Iowa, okay? And I'm being quite literal. They're gonna go back to old writings he had from 40, 50 years ago, okay? But what about what you have done? So doesn't it weigh on your conscience, Senator Klobuchar, that you might have put an innocent man in jail? If I did that, do you know what I would do to try to get him out? I mean, I would spend day and night trying to figure out, did he do it, didn't he do it? Did I do the right thing, did I do the wrong thing? Why is this Ike Tyson? I go talk to Ike Tyson. Like really, like what, are you trying to help a friend out, or did you really do it, et cetera? Are you trying to get a lenient sentence now, or were you trying to get a lenient sentence back then? Because it looks like you might have put an innocent man in jail who's still there. Doesn't that bother you? Doesn't that gnaw at you? If it doesn't, that's the problem with politicians.
No, it is, because it represents that if you don't care about justice for one individual, if you're comfortable with the possibility of putting an innocent teenager behind bars for the rest of his life, how can you be trusted to represent everyone in the United States? It's a huge issue, right? Especially at a time when criminal justice reform is an important priority for a lot of Americans. Now, without further ado, I do want to give you the last clip with Chris Wallace asking Klobuchar some tough questions about this case.
My view as someone that has worked with the Innocence Project for years is that if there is new evidence, it must come forward. It must come forward, and it must be considered immediately by the court. The job of a prosecutor is to do justice, and that means to me, convict the guilty, protect the innocent. Do your job without fear of favor.
Senator, you're not answering my question. Senator, you're not answering my question. Did you know about the fact that there was this questionable evidence that the police were coming up with?
I didn't know about this new evidence. No, I didn't know about this new evidence until I saw this report. I couldn't have. I haven't been in the office for 12 years.
But I was wondering, when you were in the office, did you know about this questionable evidence?
So she seems to be dodging the question there, and
she was careful. She's a lawyer.
Yeah.
She said, I didn't know about the new evidence. Okay, but he wasn't asking you about the new evidence. He was asking, did you know at the time that the police were trying to get these witnesses and paying them off, et cetera? The quote unquote new evidence is something that already happened that is being revealed now. Right. But if you're the prosecutor, you might have already known that back then. That's what Chris Wallace is asking, and that's what Klobuchar definitely did not answer.
Don't miss your chance to win a trip to Los Angeles and have dinner with Cenk, John, and me. Just head to tyt.com/dinnerinla to register to win. Sign up for a free Aspiration Spend and Save account. Then you just register your eligibility and swipe your Aspiration card daily on purchases to gain entries. Not only are you entering to win a trip to Los Angeles and dinner with TYT hosts, you're also not depositing your hard-earned money into fossil fuel exploration or production. As a friendly reminder, even if you already have an Aspiration account, you must still register for eligibility into the sweepstakes.